Hey folks, tonight we're stepping into a world both enchanting and bizarre. The mysterious, steamy, and sometimes downright wild realm of medieval intimacy. Picture an era of gallant knights, cryptic potions, and stolen glances, where love meant whispering sweet nothings while dodging the prying eyes of family, livestock, and the village priest. Before we dive in, hit that like button if you're ready for this dramatic historical adventure, and subscribe to the channel if you're hooked on uncovering the past's juiciest secrets. Drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's see who's joining us on this dazzling journey from around the globe. Now, let's set the mood. Dim the lights, maybe crack open a window to feel that medieval breeze. And together, let's peel back the truth behind the myths. Forget rose petals and gentle lute strums. Medieval intimacy didn't unfold in candlelit castles, but in sneaky moments inside cramped huts, where goats, chickens, and drama-loving relatives were always nearby. Buckle up as we explore a tale of passion, prohibition, and the myth of the chastity belt, diving into how love and desire still blossomed in the Middle Ages. Here we go. Imagine a 13th century European village where soggy thatched roofs sag under the rain and smoke from hearths mingles with the scent of damp earth. Muddy paths lead to the market where villagers trade turnips, gossip, and suspicious glances. This is a tight-knit world where everyone knows everything about each other, from who owes money for wool to who's been eyeing the fishmonger at the market. This tiny community isn't just a place to live. It's a natural surveillance network where a misplaced smile could fuel gossip for an entire harvest season. In that space, love wasn't just an emotion. It was an act of defiance, a silent declaration of war against invisible rules. The church, looming over the village like an unblinking pair of eyes, controlled every facet of life. It wasn't just a place for prayer. It was the courtroom of the heart, armed with hefty manuals listing everything you weren't allowed to do, and even things you weren't supposed to think about. Sex, per doctrine, was solely for procreation, and even enjoying it was considered a minor sin, worthy of a priest's furrowed brow during confession. The church's forbidden calendar, with days marked in blood red, turned lovemaking into a puzzle more complex than calculating the harvest. Sundays? No, that's the Lord's Day. Fridays? Nope, Day of Penance. Lent, Advent, or the feast day of some obscure saint? Don't even think about it. Couples under the flickering light of a torch probably counted on their fingers, searching for a safe day, only to realize that love was sometimes an act of rebellion against both God and the calendar. But the church wasn't the only barrier. Medieval society, with its close-knit villages and sharp-eared neighbors, turned every intimate moment into a challenge. A glance exchanged at the market could spark rumors. A stolen kiss by the well might draw a knowing look from the bread-selling granny. And if you think noble love was any easier, think again. Their stone castles were just as full of invisible ears. Lavish feasts with wine and minstrels were stages for covert glances, but servants, guards, and even the stone walls seemed ready to spill every secret. Even when traveling, inns with shared beds, where you slept next to a beer-reeking merchant or a farmer clutching a bundle of wool, made love a luxury rarer than Eastern silk. Yet, in that world, love still found a way to bloom, like wildflowers pushing through cracks in stone. Under twinkling stars, couples whispered promises, held hands in the dark, and forgot, if only for a moment, that the whole village was listening. Some nights they met at the market corner after closing, where the wind drowned out their words of love. Other nights they stood by a wooden fence, hoping the neighbor's dog wouldn't bark its head off. Love in the Middle Ages wasn't just passion. It was patience, defiance, and a touch of humor to face the inevitable risks. They loved through the stench of mud and sweat, past sermons from the pulpit, and despite the red-marked days on the forbidden calendar. Those moments, however small, proved that the human heart, even in the shadows of history, burned as brightly as a torch that never fades. But love, it turns out, wasn't just a matter of the heart. It was an intricate game requiring you to slip past invisible ears and harsh rules. Love in the Middle Ages was a dangerous dance where every step could lead to a prying glance, or worse, an entry in the priest's sin ledger. And tonight, we'll tell their story, quietly, as they loved. But before you drift into sleep, let me guide you to where mud and straw walls whispered tales, and privacy became the boldest game of all. The mud and straw walls of the Middle Ages, where love's secrets tried to hide, were always ready to tattle to the entire village. In that world, privacy wasn't a gift from the heavens, but a daring game, demanding you outwit the bread-selling granny's gaze and be slyer than a cat's yowl in the night. Love in the dim corners of a cowshed or by a chilly well was a clandestine act where couples waited for children to fall asleep, dogs to stop barking, and hoped the wind would mask their whispers. Listen closely, as gently as they met behind the wheat field, and let me lead you to where privacy was pricier than gold, rarer than a night free of market gossip. Picture a small village where muddy paths lead to thatched cowsheds, and the well is the hub of every story. Peasant homes with walls of mud and straw and leaky thatched roofs housed entire families in a single cramped space. No private doors, no separate rooms, just a small hearth to fend off the cold and, if you were lucky, a rough cloth curtain as a shield. Beds were often a hard patch of earth strewn with wool scraps or, at worst, a creaky wooden plank propped on stones. In that space, every sound, from a soft cough to hurried footsteps, echoed like an unwanted confession. Want a moment of intimacy? Wait until the kids are asleep, the grandparents stop muttering, and with luck, the neighbor's cat is too tired to snoop. Medieval home architecture was a testament to life's harshness. Peasant houses, typically a single multi-purpose room, weren't designed for privacy. The hearth was the heart of the home, but also where all eyes converged. A cloth curtain, if present, barely blocked anything but the cold. In noble castles, things weren't much better. Bedrooms might have stone floors and tapestries, but servants slept at the foot of the bed, or worse, stood guard outside, with ears sharper than hunting dogs. Inns where couples hoped for a sliver of space were another nightmare. Shared beds with strangers, a merchant clutching a wool bale, or a farmer reeking of mud, were standard. Love in those spaces demanded more creativity than harvesting in a downpour. Medieval couples, defying all odds, still found ways. They met secretly by the well after sunset, where the sound of flowing water hid their whispers. They slipped into wheat fields, using the wind as an ally, though the neighbor's dog, like a spy, was always ready to bark. Some couples got craftier, using secret signals, like 3 taps on a cowshed wall or lighting a small torch, to arrange meetings. But even the cleverest plans could collapse. Once, in a small village, a couple thought the dead of night was safe enough. They snuck into the cowshed, hoping the rustle of hay would cover everything. But a tumble into a turnip barrel, followed by a startled yelp, woke the entire household. By morning, the village was chuckling at the well, and the turnip mishap became local legend, retold every harvest. The risk of getting caught didn't just come from family or neighbors. Medieval communities, with their invisible ears, turned every intimate moment into a bold act. A fake cough to mask footsteps could wake the house. A glance at the market could spark gossip from the vegetable stall to the church. And the church, ever present like a shadow, didn't just want to control souls, but also private moments. Priests, with their sin ledgers, were ready to ask questions that made you blush during confession. Love in the Middle Ages was a risky game, where each step could lead to a suspicious stare, or worse, a lengthy sermon from the pulpit. Yet couples persisted with patience and a dash of humor. They whispered by the well, held hands in the cowshed, and giggled when the cat yowled, ruining the moment. They loved quietly, as if the village couldn't hear. Those fleeting moments, however small, proved that privacy, though costly, was worth the gamble. But the game was never easy, especially when the church, with its divine eyes and thick forbidden calendar, stood ready to turn every kiss into a sin. Close your eyes, let the wind guide you to where sermons echo, and love becomes a puzzle tougher than surviving winter. From the wheat fields, where medieval couples whispered secret vows, we step into another space, where divine eyes never blink. The church, with its cold stone walls and towering pulpit, didn't just govern souls, but sought to control the most intimate moments. In that world, love wasn't just a dangerous dance amid nosy neighbors, but a puzzle to solve under God's stern gaze, or rather, the priests with ledgers thicker than the Bible. With zeal, the church turned the calendar into a holy maze, where loving on the wrong day was a one-way ticket to purgatory, and joy, if any, had to be kept as secret as a state affair. Listen softly as couples counted permitted days by candlelight, and let me tell you quietly about an era when the church policed bedrooms stricter than taxes. Imagine a medieval village where the church bell tolls each morning, reminding everyone that God is watching, and the priest with quill in hand is too. The church wasn't just for prayer or confession. It was the epicenter of all rules, from what you ate on Fridays to how often you could love in a month. Sex, per doctrine, wasn't a gift of the heart, but a sacred duty, meant only for procreation. Any pleasure beyond that was a misstep toward purgatory. To keep everyone in line, the church issued strict rules, meticulously recorded in books priests carried like weapons. The missionary position, dull in its simplicity, was the only approved standard, not because it was romantic, but because it was deemed least offensive to God. Any deviation, even a hint of enthusiasm, could land you at the confession booth, facing a priest's scowl and a saint's disapproving stare. But rules about positions were just the tip of the iceberg. The church's forbidden calendar was the real maze, a blood-red ledger with days marked like warnings from heaven. Sundays, the Lord's Day, were strictly off-limits. Fridays, for penance, were untouchable. Lent's 40 days meant even newlyweds were urged to focus on prayer instead of each other. Advent, saints' days, and obscure feasts for saints no one remembered, all were labeled no. A bride in the flickering candlelight likely sat counting on her fingers, seeking a safe day to love without risking God's or the priest's wrath. But the calendar, in its complexity, seemed designed to ensure love, if it happened, required more planning than a harvest. Loving on the wrong day, per the church, wasn't just a sin, but an invitation to purgatory, where flames burned eternal and no calendar could save you. The church, in its fervor, didn't stop at issuing rules. They ensured enforcement sometimes with ironic inconsistency. In one small village, a newlywed peasant couple, in the innocence of fresh love, forgot it was Lent. They loved, not to defy God, but because candlelight and spring's chill made them forget the red-marked calendar. By morning, the sharp-eared neighbor whispered the tale to the fishmonger at the market. Soon the priest summoned the couple to church, delivering a stern lecture on restraint. They knelt before a saint statue, muttering prayers, promising not to repeat the offense, at least until Lent ended. But humans, as always, had their ways, and that promise, under the next night's candlelight, was likely forgotten again. Nobles with heavy coin purses often bent the rules. A lord caught loving his wife on a forbidden saint's day could buy forgiveness with a new church bell or a fertile plot of land. The priest, though frowning, often turned a blind eye, since ringing bells or land glorified God, right? But peasants, with only turnips in their pockets, had no such privilege. They faced suspicious stares, reprimands, and sometimes a small fine, enough to remind them the church controlled not just the chapel, but the bedroom. This injustice, though no one dared say it, was part of the medieval world, where money and power could soothe the anger of both God and priest. But don't think the church only forbade. They offered advice, though it often sounded like a test of patience. A 13th century moral guide urged couples to love without too much passion, too much joy, or delay. A list so dull it makes you wonder if God really cared about such details. Couples were encouraged to practice restraint, as if joy was a luxury reserved for saints. Some zealous priests even suggested praying before lovemaking to ensure the act was purely sacred. Under flickering candles, some couples likely chuckled, nodded to the priest, then went home to do as they pleased, quietly, without prayers. The church, for all its severity, couldn't fully quench human instinct. Despite thick forbidden calendars and frowning priests, couples found ways. They loved on unmarked nights, or sometimes defied the red marks entirely. In a small town, a couple faced the priest's wrath for loving on a saint's day. They bowed, promised reform, but their glance in church under stained glass light showed they weren't too worried about purgatory. Love, it seems, had the power to outlast sermons and calendars. Though the church tried to police bedrooms stricter than taxes, humans, in their stubbornness, quietly defied. But the church's control didn't end with calendars or dull advice. They had real investigators, priests with quills and sharp ears ready to dig into bedroom secrets. Confession booths under church candlelight weren't just for confessing sins, but stages for questions that made parishioners blush. And we'll tell their tales quietly, as couples whispered in the dark. But before sleep claims you, let me guide you to where candles flicker and priests' questions ring, sharper than church bells. From cold stone walls where the church cast nets over the most intimate moments, we step into an even more private space, the confession booth, where flickering candles and trembling whispers echo. In the Middle Ages, priests weren't just soul guides, but bedroom detectives, armed with quills and sin ledgers, ready to ask questions that made parishioners flush. From how often you loved to the positions used, they seemed to know your bedroom better than your birthday. But not everyone was honest, and not every priest was equally stern. In the confession booth shadows, under candles and probing eyes, stories were told, lies were spun, and history whispered secrets, both humorous and biting. Listen gently as parishioners muttered confessions, and let me lead you to a world where priests were detectives of the heart. Picture a languid afternoon in the 13th century Europe when the church bell tolls, summoning villagers to the confession booth. The church, with its stained glass windows filtering light into streaks of red and blue, is a place for souls to be cleansed, or at least thoroughly inspected. The confession booth, often a dim, cramped corner just big enough for the priest and penitent, is separated by a thin wooden panel pierced with holes. Flickering candlelight illuminates the priest's stern face, quill in hand, ready to jot down notes. Here, it's not just major sins like theft or slander that are scrutinized. The tiniest details of intimate life, from how often you loved to how you did it, become topics, as if God needed a detailed report on your every night. The priest, with his sin ledger in hand, asks questions even your mother wouldn't dare, and probably wouldn't want to know. These questions were no joke. A 14th century confession manual, written for priests, lists a slew of specific queries to ensure no sin slipped through. How many times did you love your wife this week? Was it on a Sunday? What position? Was there any pleasure beyond procreation? Asked in a low, steady tone like reciting scripture, these questions left penitents mumbling, blushing, and sometimes wishing they could vanish into the booth shadows. A young wife standing before the priest might bow her head, hands clasped tightly, trying to answer without her voice trembling. But the church, with its zeal, didn't tolerate vagueness. They wanted to know everything, as if each detail was a piece of your soul's puzzle, or worse, evidence for purgatory. But not all priests were the same. Some were strict, their quills scratching every confession like medieval accountants. These priests, with eyes sharper than daggers, missed no detail. A husband, in his innocence, might admit to loving his wife on a Friday, a day of penance. The strict priest would pause, frown, and demand he kneel for 3 extra hours, recite penitential prayers, and vow not to repeat the offense. Their ledgers, filled with tiny script, bore witness to their dedication or obsession with controlling the village's bedrooms. In a small town, there was a tale of a priest notorious for his meticulousness. He recorded every sin, from eating fish on a Wednesday to loving during Lent, and the villagers, though terrified, whispered that he knew their beds better than harvest days. Yet there were lenient priests, those who turned a blind eye with a discreet smile or a weary nod. Perhaps too familiar with human nature, these priests didn't fuss over every detail. A wife confessing she and her husband had fun on a saint's day might get a sigh, a few prayers to recite, and be more careful next time. These priests, though carrying sin ledgers, often let them sit untouched on the table, more prop than tool. In a riverside village, one priest was beloved, not just for short sermons, but for pretending not to hear sensitive confessions, as long as a bit of bread or eggs was offered to the church. The contrast between strict and lenient priests, like candlelight and shadow, painted a complex picture of the Middle Ages, where rules were rigid, but humans always found ways to bend them. Parishioners, of course, weren't always truthful. In the booth's dimness, with flickering candles and the priest's probing eyes, lying became an art. A husband, knowing confessing a Sunday tryst would mean kneeling in penance, might mumble, "It was just Monday, Father." A wife, fearing rebuke for frequency, might shave down the real number, as if God couldn't count. In a small village, a farmer was famous for his lies. When the priest asked how often he loved his wife that week, he replied, deadpan, "Just once, Father, and for God." The priest, though skeptical, nodded, lacking evidence beyond market whispers. That lie, passed down generations, became a humorous tale, Proof that humans, even under the church's gaze, had ways to guard their secrets. But even when parishioners lied, the church held power. The detailed questions, though blush-inducing, reminded everyone that no corner of life, not even the bedroom, was beyond God's eyes. Priests, with their ledgers and quills, were relentless investigators, though some grew weary of their task. Some penitents left the church relieved, as if escaping a trial. Others, with lies still lingering, stepped out with a sly smile, knowing they'd won a small round against the priest. But the game, like the flickering candle, never ended. The next week they'd return, muttering new confessions or new lies, under the church's watchful gaze. These confessions, with all their humor and tension, testified to the church's control in the Middle Ages. Priests, strict or lenient, were gatekeepers of morality, but humans, with their stubbornness, always slipped through. They left the church relieved, at least until the next week, when candles flickered and questions resumed. But love, though policed by the church, wasn't confined to the bedroom. It was also a contract, a deal negotiated not with hearts, but with cattle, land, and family promises. Close your eyes. Let the candlelight guide you to where those contracts were sealed, and love became a transaction rather than a dream. From the confession booths, where priests probed every corner of the heart, we step into the noisy daylight of the village market, where contracts weren't signed with ink, but with cattle, land, and pledges of peace among neighbors. In the Middle Ages, marriage wasn't a tale of roses or longing glances. It was a transaction negotiated with the care of buying a horse and sometimes the clamor of a weekend market. Love, if it existed, was an unexpected bonus, quietly sprouting after days of arguing over pigsties or who forgot the turnip in the kitchen. With the zeal of a market hawker, families traded brides, grooms, and vows not to feud, while hearts, as usual, waited their turn. Listen softly as whispered sweet nothings weave through cattle moos, and let me tell you quietly about an era when marriage was worth 3 cows, or at least a promise not to draw swords. Imagine a small 13th century European village where the weekend market is the biggest event, with stalls piled high with turnips, rough wool, and gossip. In one corner, under an old oak shade, 2 families gather, not to trade, but to negotiate a deal weightier than the harvest, a marriage. No flowers, no minstrels, just distant cattle moos and haggling over who brings how much land. A bride, perhaps 16, stands silent, her eyes drifting over stacked wheat bundles while her parents barter. She's worth 3 cows, a stream-side plot, and a promise the groom's family won't squabble over turnips anymore. The groom, maybe a young farmer with hands rough from plowing, has little say. Marriage in the Middle Ages wasn't about 2 people. It was a deal between 2 families, measured in livestock, land, and sometimes just a vow not to clash at harvest. Peasant marriages hinged on practical needs. One family needed land for wheat, another needed cows for plowing. The bride brought a dowry, maybe a goose, some wool cloth, or if lucky, a small plot. The groom in return pledged firewood, pigsty protection, and no trouble with neighbors. These negotiations, held under hazy sunlight or in smoky kitchens, were as loud as a market. Shouts over cow counts, sighs when one side demanded extra turnips, and satisfied chuckles when the deal was struck, all formed an unromantic symphony. A bride, in a rare moment, might charm her in-laws with an extra egg basket or a timely smile, but her role was usually to stand still, awaiting the deal's close. Women, though lacking a loud voice, sometimes used subtlety to ease tensions, like seasoned vendors soothing picky buyers. Nobles with stone castles and tapestried floors weren't spared this game. Their marriages were chess moves in a political game, where a bride might bring a town, a knightly troop, or a king's alliance. A marriage between powerful families could end a war, or at least ensure no one lobbed stones at each other's castles. These talks, held in banquet halls with wine and minstrels, were no less tense. A lord might scowl when the bride's family demanded more gold, while the bride's mother, with a sharp gaze, insisted the groom vow not to war with neighbors. Love in these deals was rarer than Eastern silk. If it grew, it was only after years of bickering over castle management or who let the horse trample the garden. But love, though rare, found ways to creep in. In a small village, there's a tale of a peasant couple who loved despite their family's plans for other matches. They met by the stream, stealing glances between waterhalls and whispered vows under the oak. Her family wanted her wed to a man with 5 cows. His pushed a girl with a big plot. But love, like a weed, wouldn't yield. They fled one moonless night, hiding in a friend's hayloft, and after weeks of village gossip, their families relented. Their marriage, though born of scandal, endured, perhaps because they were used to defying rules and stares. That story, retold at the market, proved that love, though not marriage's goal, sometimes sprouted amid cattle and land deals. Women, whatever their class, had to be shrewd in these transactions. A peasant bride might bring an egg basket or a goose to win her mother-in-law's favor, knowing harmony eased her life. A noble lady might use a smile or soft words to calm tensions between families, like a tiny diplomat. Their role, though unwritten in contracts, was the glue for fragile deals. But this shrewdness wasn't always easy. A bride, forced to wed a stranger, might stand silent during talks, eyes on wheat bundles, heart heavy as a turnip sack. Love, if it came, often arrived later, like an unexpected gift after days of arguing over pigsties or forgotten gates. Medieval marriage, though a transaction, wasn't entirely loveless. After tense deals, after days living with cattle, land, and gossip, many couples found connection. They hauled water together, plowed fields, laughed when the goose waddled into the kitchen. Love in those moments grew quietly, like weeds through dry soil. But not everyone was lucky. Some marriages stayed contracts, with silent meals and nights turned back to back. Still, the medieval world, for all its pragmatism, left room for stolen glances, sudden smiles, and moments that stirred the heart. Marriage, with all its market clamor, was the bedrock of medieval society. But before contracts were sealed, before cattle were traded and land measured, there was another dance, subtler, riskier, the dance of glances, whispers, and stolen kisses under the village's gaze. Close your eyes, let the cattle's moves guide you to where love began, not with contracts, but with hurried glances by the well. From the noisy market, where marriages were haggled over with cattle and land, we slip quietly to the well's edge, where hurried glances and hushed whispers began a more delicate dance. In the Middle Ages, flirting wasn't about roses or ink-drenched love letters. It was a dangerous art, demanding a spy's finesse under the watchful eyes of mothers, aunts, and the entire village. A glance at the market was worth more than a bouquet, but a stolen kiss behind the cowshed could lead to public shaming, or worse, a lengthy sermon from the priest. In the dim shadows of fields or the flickering light of fairs, couples secretly exchanged handkerchiefs, sang love songs, and carved names on trees. but always with care. For the village, like an uninvited audience, never slept. Listened softly as words of love slipped through the wind, and let me tell you, quietly, about an era when flirting was a moonlight act under the village's gaze. Imagine an early morning in the 13th century Europe when mist still clings to the fields and vendors' calls echo in the village market. Wooden stalls brim with turnips, rough wool, and charred bread, but amid the crowd, tiny, near-invisible moments mark love's start. A young man, arms full of firewood, steals a glance at a girl hauling water from the well. Their eyes meet, just for a second, but it's worth more than a basket of eggs. The girl, with a shy smile, lowers her head, but that glance spoke what neither dared say aloud. Flirting in the Middle Ages was a game of silence where small signals, a look, a smile, a casual brush of hands, carried the weight of poetry. But this game was never played alone. Mothers, aunts, and the village were ever present, uninvited spectators with sharp ears and piercing eyes. A girl fetching water might be trailed by her mother, ensuring she didn't linger too long chatting with a boy. A lad by the wool stall could feel the fishmonger's knowing stare, who knew every village tale before it happened. The village, with its huddled houses and muddy paths, was a stage where every act was scrutinized. A kiss behind the cowshed, though seemingly secret, might be spotted by the neighbor's cat, whose yowl could wake the house. By morning, the tale, embroidered with extras, would spread from the well to the church, and the village would chuckle, or worse, whisper of public fines. To survive this game, medieval couples crafted subtle customs, like love's secret codes. A lad might offer a girl an embroidered handkerchief, not for its beauty, but as a sign he wanted to say more than good morning. If she accepted, she might keep it, or better, stitch a tiny flower before returning it. In some regions, couples carved their names on an old oak at the village edge, a romantic yet risky act, as the oak was love's bulletin board. These customs, though simple, let love slip past watchful eyes, like weeds through stone cracks. But they were risky. A handkerchief in a mother's hands, a carved name spotted by the bread seller, and the village had gossip for the harvest season. Village fairs, with torchlight and lyre music, were perfect for flirting, but also the riskiest. Couples could sneak a hand clasp in the crowd or stand close by a game stall, pretending to care who hit the apple with a ball. But the village's eyes, like unquenchable torches, always watched. At one small fair, a farmer lad, smitten with a wool seller, sang a love song too loudly, thinking music and laughter would drown it. But the village, with razor-sharp ears, caught every word. By morning he faced the church, a small fine and a long sermon on restraint. Villagers, though chuckling, whispered that the song, though loud, made the girl smile, perhaps reward enough. Flirting required a spy's skill. Couples learned to signal without detection, brushing hands while hauling water, leaving a flower by the well as an invitation. They timed it right. After dusk, when mothers were weaving and neighbors napped, they picked spots, the field's edge, where wind muffled whispers, or behind the cowshed, where hay's scent hid all. But even the best plans could fail. A safe kiss might be spotted by a child, and the tale would leap from hearth to hearth, faster than fresh bread's aroma. Public shaming, like standing before the church in a dunce cap, was a light penalty. Worse, the priest might demand kneeling penance, or the village would gossip until next harvest. Yet this scrutiny couldn't fully snuff out love. Under silver moonlight, couples found ways. They traded glances at the market, sang love songs when the village was drunk on ale, carved names on oaks despite the risk. In moments by the well or in a fair's flickering light, they forgot the village's eyes, just to feel their hearts race. Love in the Middle Ages was a risky dance, but also a song, ringing out though the village listened. They loved quietly, under moonlight and watchful eyes, and those small moments proved the heart needed no permit to stir. But this delicate dance didn't always lead to free love. Harsher rules hidden behind the village's gaze governed honor, chastity, and myths woven from fear. Close your eyes, let the moonlight guide you to where whispers were judged, and a strange tale of chastity belts begins, funnier than any fairground story. Imagine a small medieval European village where the forge's glow lights muddy paths and the scent of fresh bread mixes with hammer clangs. In thatched homes, women gather by looms, swapping news of harvests, wool prices, and market tales. One day, a strange rumor spreads that somewhere in a far-off kingdom, brides are locked in iron belts, keys held by husbands off to war. The women, with twinkling eyes and stifled giggles, shake their heads at the tale. Chastity belts? One might have scoffed. Easier to hire the whole village to watch. They burst into laughter, knowing real surveillance needed no steel, just a mother's gaze, the fishmonger's whispers, and a priest's pointed questions in the confession booth. The chastity belt, as known from films, is a captivating but utterly impractical notion for the medieval context. Iron belts with bulky locks and intricate designs were products of Renaissance and Victorian imaginations, not the 13th century. In an era when personal hygiene was a struggle, bathing was rare, and clean water costlier than wine, wearing a heavy, infection-prone metal device was laughably unrealistic. Moreover, historical records from laws to diaries are silent on chastity belts. No blacksmith advertised belt making, no priest blessed locks, no law outlined their use. Manuscripts, detailing everything from bread recipes to thief punishments, never mention clanking iron contraptions. The chastity belt, it seems, was a tale spun by later generations, eager to paint the Middle Ages as darker than reality. The origin of this myth can be traced to the Renaissance, when scholars and artists looked back at the Middle Ages with a mix of curiosity and mockery. They imagined a world steeped in superstition and oppression, where women were locked up like safes. Some chastity belts displayed in Renaissance museums were often fakes, crafted for amusement or to bolster tales of a dark era. By the Victorian era, when moral obsession peaked, the myth grew larger. Collectors with gleaming eyes brought back rusty iron relics, claiming they were proof of medieval women's subjugation. But the truth, as usual, was less dramatic. Medieval women, though bound by many constraints, didn't need iron belts to be watched. The village, with its sharp ears and ceaseless tongues, did that job more effectively than any lock. Instead of chastity belts, real surveillance came from the community's invisible eyes. A young bride, newly arrived at her husband's home, could feel her mother-in-law's gaze, always watching to ensure proper behavior. The neighbor lady, with a storytelling flair rivaling fair minstrels, was ready to spread any rumor, from a stolen glance to a misplaced smile. The priest, with his quill and sin ledger, was the final overseer, asking questions in the confession booth that made the bride blush. In a small village, there's a tale of a bride so closely monitored by her husband's family. They trailed her everywhere, from the kitchen to the well, from the cowshed to the market. ensuring she spoke to no man but her husband. Once she innocently smiled at a wool seller, and the family convened, like a mini-trial, to discuss her suspicious behavior. The bride, with a wry smile, likely shook her head, wishing an iron belt were less intrusive than her mother-in-law's stare. This surveillance wasn't just for women. Men, though freer, didn't escape the village's eyes. A lad meeting a girl by the well might be spotted by her father, and a hasty kiss behind the cowshed could lead to public fines. But the heaviest pressure fell on women, whose honor was deemed family property. A bride before her wedding might be shadowed by her mother and aunts, ensuring she did nothing to lose value in her in-laws' eyes. A smile, a word, or just a glance could spark rumors. The village, with its endless curiosity, turned every act into a story, and those stories, like smoke from a forge, spread through every corner. Yet medieval women weren't merely victims of scrutiny. They coped with finesse and a touch of humor. A bride, hearing chastity belt rumors, might smirk, knowing a neighbor's stare was scarier than any lock. A wife, watched by her mother-in-law, might use a smile or soft words to ease tensions, like a diplomat in the kitchen. They knew that in a world of eyes and ears, silence was a weapon and a smile a shield. Despite the surveillance, they found ways to live, love, and sometimes laugh at the absurd tales the village wove. The chastity belt myth, though untrue, shows how history gets twisted by later generations. The Middle Ages, with all its complexity, needed no steel to control women. The village's eyes, neighbors' whispers, and priests' ledgers did that more efficiently. But history, as usual, loves tall tales, and the chastity belt, with its clanking locks, became a story shinier than the truth. Those medieval brides, with wry smiles and twinkling eyes, likely knew the real surveillance came not from iron, but from the people around them. But not every dark corner of the Middle Ages was watched by the village's eyes. In some places, under dim lamplight, rules bent, and love, or at least a version of it, was bought and sold like wool at the market. Close your eyes, let the forge's firelight guide you to where locks didn't exist, but drama was endless, in brothels known to all yet spoken of by none. From absurd chastity belt tales where the village's eyes were sharper than locks, we quietly step into a darker corner of the Middle Ages. Not the darkness of sin, but of dim lamplight, where brothels existed as secrets everyone knew. In the 13th century, brothels weren't hidden in alleys. They were licensed, taxed, and managed with the pragmatism of a village bakery. Patrons arrived with eggs, wool, or scraps of cloth, while weary keepers sorted out dramas between clients and prostitutes, like running a chaotic market stall. The church frowned, but taxes, as always, softened their rebukes. Listen softly as coins clink in the dark, and let me tell you quietly about a legal business where drama burned endless as forge smoke. Imagine a narrow street in medieval London where flickering oil lamps light creaky wooden walls, and the scent of barley ale mixes with damp wool from a nearby market. This is Southwark's famed red light district across the Thames, where brothels sprouted like mushrooms after rain, managed by city officials with a bookkeeper's care. These wooden houses, with windows draped in rough cloth, didn't hide. They were licensed by authorities, taxed like forges or bakeries, and sometimes overseen by brothel keepers, a grand title for a job that mostly meant settling spats between drunken patrons and prostitutes. Southwark, with its muddy streets and laughter spilling from windows, was the hub of a legal enterprise accepted by the city, though no one dared mention it loudly in church. Medieval brothels weren't just dens of desire. They were part of the social order, seen by authorities as a necessary evil to prevent graver sins like rape, adultery, or worse, wild dancing at fairs. In London, brothels were tightly regulated. They sat in designated zones with fixed hours, and prostitutes followed rules, from staying clean to paying taxes on time. Patrons weren't just drunks. They were farmers with egg baskets, merchants with cloth scraps, or even sneaky clerics, despite vows of restraint. Payment wasn't always coin. A farmer might offer rough wool, a smith some iron nails, and the keeper, with weary eyes, recorded it all like a medieval accountant. Brothels, it turns out, were mini-markets, where everything, from eggs to drama, had a price. But drama, like forged smoke, always rose. A drunken patron might bicker with a prostitute over a cracked egg. A merchant, feeling he overpaid in wool, might loudly demand a refund, only to be shooed out by the keeper with a broom. In Southwark, there's a tale of a prostitute beloved for her voice, sweet as a fair's lyre. She drew crowds from farmers to nobles, and patrons paid an extra goose to hear her sing before leaving. But the village with harsh eyes scorned her. Market bread sellers whispered she was living sin, though their husbands sneaked to the brothel on Saturday nights. She, with a wry smile, likely grew used to the scorn, but her song rang out, a quiet defiance. That story, retold at London's market, shows brothels, though legal, were places of contradiction, between affection and honor, coins and morals. The church naturally disapproved. From the pulpit, priests decried brothels as sin's nests, but in the shadows, they often looked away. Some churches even collected rent from brothels, an irony the village knew but didn't dare voice. Brothel taxes filled city coffers, fixing roads, building bridges, and sometimes buying new church bells. The church frowned, but money, as always, softened rebukes. Authorities, with a bookkeeper's pragmatism, saw brothels as steady income. In London, officials even passed laws to protect prostitutes from violence, though these were often ignored when drama flared. Brothels, in their contradiction, were part of medieval society, legal, necessary, but always veiled behind rough cloth. Life in brothels wasn't always tragic. Some prostitutes chose the trade for survival, especially widows or those without family. They worked, paid taxes, and sometimes saved enough for a small shop. But society, with its harsh eyes, never forgot their role. A prostitute, though beloved by patrons, was barred from the market's busy hours or told to stand far from church on Sundays. That scorn, like forged smoke, clung to them, though they contributed no less than bakers. Yet under dim lamplight, they laughed, sang, and lived, defying the village's gaze. Brothels, with all their drama, were where humans bared their complexity, from desire to affection, coins to wry smiles. Managing a brothel was no easy task. Keepers, often older women, handled every mess, from drunken patrons to prostitutes arguing over cloth scraps. They recorded, collected taxes, and sometimes chased out clients with a broom, like weary market vendors. In Southwark, brothels were required to have clean curtains and fixed closing hours, but drama, like shattering ale cups, never followed rules. One night, a patron brought a live hen for payment, only for it to escape, sparking chaos. That tale, retold at London's market, became a humorous anecdote, but also proof that brothels, though legal, were a world of trouble. Medieval brothels, with their dim lamps and ale-wool scent, were a small corner of history where humans lived their contradictions. They existed quietly, as secrets everyone knew, licensed yet scorned, needed yet veiled. In those wooden houses, drama flared, but so did moments of laughter, song, and smiles defying harsh eyes. But brothels, though dens of desire, couldn't hide another medieval truth. A world where love demanded overcoming not just eyes, but mud, sweat, and olfactory barriers scarier than market whispers. Close your eyes, let the oil lamp's glow guide you to where love faced its oddest test, and the heart needed more courage than the nose. From the brothel's dim glow, where drama and coins clinked behind rough curtains, we quietly stepped to the riverside, where another challenge of medieval love awaited. Not the village's eyes, but an olfactory barrier scarier than market whispers. In the 13th century, bathing was a rare event, deodorizing a distant dream, and teeth were scrubbed with hearth ash on lucky days. Loving, it turns out, was a feat of the nose, requiring courage to overcome mud, sweat, and wool's clingy stench. People chewed mint, splashed in rivers, or used flowers as crude perfume to woo, but cowshed and hearth smoke odors overwhelmed like an uninvited tune. Listen softly as words of love slip through rushing water, and let me tell you quietly about an era when kissing tested the bravery of both heart and nose. Imagine a late afternoon in medieval Europe when pale sunlight gilds a river winding through fields. By the bank, a lad stands shivering, not from love, but from icy water soaking his rough tunic. He's just bathed hastily, hoping to wash off cowshed stench to impress a girl he fancies at the market. But climbing ashore, wet tunic clinging, he realizes wool and mud smell lingers, a reminder that hygiene then was a battle never won. That evening he chews a mint sprig, hoping his breath outshines his tunic's odor. But standing near the girl by the well, he gets only a polite smile and a sneeze as the river bath gave him a cold. That tale, retold at the market with chuckles, proves medieval love demanded sacrifice, not just of the heart, but of health. Personal hygiene in the Middle Ages was a bigger challenge than dodging the plague. Bathing wasn't daily. Clean water, pricier than ale, was saved for turnip soup or cloth washing, not soaking. A bath monthly or seasonally was a luxury for peasants, and even nobles bathed only for big events, like weddings or after muddy journeys. Public bathhouses, found in cities like London, often closed due to disease fears or indecent behavior. To get clean, people relied on rivers, but frigid water and strong currents made bathing a risky adventure. A lad, set on wooing a wool seller, might wade into a river, only to lose his only tunic to the current, or worse, return with a week-long fever. Deodorizing was an alien concept. Clothes, often rough wool or tanned leather, were worn across seasons, soaking up mud, sweat, and hearth smoke like an olfactory diary. Undergarments, if owned, were rarely washed, and in rain, wet wool's stench rose like a dare to anyone nearby. To cope, people turned to crude fixes. A lad might chew mint or thyme, hoping for sweeter breath than cowshed reek. A girl aiming to charm might crush wildflowers, like roses or daisies, into a rough perfume, rubbing it on her neck and hair. But these efforts, like dim moonlight on a river, were fleeting. Flower scents faded under wool's odor, and mint, though fragrant, couldn't mask hearth smoke on tunics. Kissing in the Middle Ages tested the nose's courage, requiring both to blind their eyes and noses to feel the heart. Teeth, if cared for, fared no better. People used hearth ash or soft twigs to scrub, but only on lucky days. Breath, often reeking of turnip soup or barley ale, was another hurdle for love. Some wealthy folk tried herbal mixes, like cloves or anise, to sweeten breath, but these were costlier than gold and confined to castles. Peasants with turnips in their pockets accepted that breath, like clothes, was just life. A girl by the well might smile at a mint-chewing lad, but both knew her radiant smile couldn't hide mud on her skirt or wool scent on his tunic. Women, with their ingenuity, were often more creative in wooing. They ground wildflowers like daisies or lavender into powder mixed with pig fat for crude perfume and rubbed it on hair or necks. Some wore small cloth sachets of dried herbs, like thyme or mint, at their waists, hoping the scent outdid wet wool. These efforts, though charming, were fleeting. A girl in a fair's flickering light might stand near her crush, a faint wildflower scent wafting. But when wind blew, her tunic's hearth smoke or his boots' mud reminded them that medieval love was a battle with the nose. Yet they stood there, trading glances, smiling, as if mud's scent was a minor note in their tale. Nobles with more resources weren't spared this challenge. They might bathe in wooden tubs with warm water, rub rose oil from the east, and wipe with silk. But their clothes, wool, leather, and fur, still held sweat and castle hearth smoke. A lady in a splendid gown might smell of roses entering a banquet, but hours later her cloak's wool scent won. A lord, though oiling his beard, carried horse stench from the stables or ale from last night's feast. Love in castles or huts demanded forgiveness, not just for words, but for uninvited scents. These wooing efforts, though comical, prove love's power. A lad, set on impressing, might brave a freezing river only to return with a cold and sodden tunic. That tale, retold at the market, made the village laugh, but the girl he liked with a shy smile likely cherished his effort. A girl, crushing flowers for perfume, might stand by the well, hoping her crush noticed the daisy scent amid mud. Those moments, however small, showed love miraculously found its way, despite sweat, wool, and hearth smoke. They loved not because they were clean, but because the heart, like moonlight on a river, needed no perfection to shine. But love, though conquering olfactory hurdles, faced another challenge, not mud's scent, but desperate efforts to avoid another mouth to feed in a cramped hut. Close your eyes. Let the river's rush guide you to where herbs were ground in kitchens, and love became a game of fragile hope and humorous outcomes. From the chilly riverside, where medieval love braved olfactory barriers with mint and wildflower perfumes, we quietly step into the kitchen corner, where another silent battle unfolded. In the 13th century, contraception wasn't science, but a lottery, a game of fragile hope with solutions like drinking beaver brewed ale, hopping up and down, or using animal membranes, often ending in good news 9 months later. The church, with its towering pulpit and thick forbidden calendar, condemned these efforts as sins against God's will. But the poor, with cramped huts and turnips never enough, still tried in secret. In flickering firelight, they ground herbs, whispered recipes, and hoped, though history often laughed at their plans. Listen softly as a woman secretly mixes herbs in the kitchen corner, and let me tell you quietly about an era when contraception was an ironic game with slim hope and plenty of failure. Imagine a small medieval European hut where hearth firelight glows on mud and straw walls, and the scent of turnip soup blends with half-ground herbs. In the kitchen corner, a woman hunches over a mortar, secretly grinding mugwort thyme and odd sprigs plucked from the fields. She whispers a recipe, passed from mother or grandmother, hoping it'll spare another mouth in a hut already bursting. Outside, cold wind whistles through roof gaps, a reminder that winter nears, and another child means fewer turnips for all. Contraception in the Middle Ages wasn't just personal desire. It was a pragmatic act, a desperate bid to keep the hut from collapsing under the weight of hungry mouths. The Church, with the severity of its pulpit, viewed any attempt at contraception as a sin against God's will. Sex, per doctrine, was solely for procreation, and any act thwarting that purpose was scribbled into the sin ledger, ready for the priest to unearth during confession. A woman admitting to using herbs to prevent pregnancy might face kneeling before a saint's statue, or worse, the village whispering of her as a betrayer of God. But the Church, though powerful, couldn't control the kitchen corner, where crude recipes were passed down through generations. The poor, with drafty huts and turnips never enough, still tried in secret, defying forbidden calendars and prying eyes. Hopping up and down, at least you burned calories before motherhood? Drinking beaver brewed ale? Perhaps it only got you drunk before the good news. Contraception, it turns out, was a game everyone knew you played, but no one dared say aloud. Medieval contraception methods, though creative, were more mythical than scientific. Mugwort, a common herb, was ground into powder, mixed with barley ale or water, and drunk in hopes of preventing pregnancy. Thyme, fennel, and even willow bark, later known to contain aspirin-like compounds, were used, though their effect was as faint as kitchen smoke. Some women tried animal membranes, like sheep bladders, as crude barriers, but preparing them required patience and a not-too-sensitive nose. Stranger recipes existed, like drinking beaver-brewed ale or wearing herbal charms at the waist, believed to hold mystical power. One method, recorded in medical texts of the time, advised women to jump up and down 7 times after lovemaking, as if gravity could solve everything. These efforts, though hopeful, often ended with a newborn's cry 9 months later, and the village, chuckling, had new gossip by the well. The folk, with their ingenuity, didn't rely only on herbs or hopping. They passed down secrets from midwives or elder women, like avoiding love during full moons, believing it boosted conception odds. These superstitions, though ineffective, gave a sense of control in an uncertain world. But the Church, with sharp ears, wasn't easily fooled. A priest, suspecting a couple used herbs, might ask pointed questions in confession, leaving them blushing and muttering lies. In a small village, a couple was gossiped about for trying too hard to avoid pregnancy. They secretly ground mugwort in the kitchen, hopped behind the cowshed, and even wore herbal charms. But each morning, the neighbor lady, with a dagger-like stare, whispered the wife, "Must have brewed herbs last night." When the good news arrived, the village roared with laughter, and the couple, though blushing, could only shrug, knowing their lottery game had lost again. These crude methods testify to medieval pragmatism. In huts where every turnip was counted, another child could be joy, but also burden. The poor, with empty pockets and harsh winters, had no choice but to try everything, from herbs to superstitions. But success, like hearth firelight, flickered and faded. A woman grinding mugwort in the kitchen might whisper a prayer, not to God, but to hope itself. A husband, by the cowshed, might chuckle as his wife hopped, knowing they played a game history rarely let them win. Yet they tried quietly, defying the Church, village eyes, and recipes never certain. The irony of medieval contraception lies in this. Though the Church forbade it, the folk found ways. They ground herbs, wore charms, and hopped not in rebellion, but for survival. Those recipes, passed through generations, are part of a silent history where people faced reality with ingenuity and humor. A couple, after many failures, might sit by the hearth, laughing at their efforts, welcoming a new child with a wry shrug. Love in the Middle Ages didn't just overcome mud stench and village eyes. It surpassed fragile kitchen hopes, finding a way despite defeats. But not every couple waited for a wedding to love. In huts under dim moonlight were stolen moments where love outran rules and the village's spy-like eyes. Close your eyes, let the mortar's grinding guide you to where hasty kisses echoed, and love became a game riskier than contraception. From the dim kitchen corner, where herb recipes were ground with fragile hopes of sparing another mouth, we quietly stepped to the moonlit wheat field where a riskier game unfolded. In the Middle Ages, premarital sex wasn't rare, but it demanded a true spy's stealth. A hasty kiss behind the cowshed could lead to fines, public shaming, or a rushed wedding under village scrutiny. Neighbors with ears sharper than hounds were unpaid spies, and priests with sin ledgers played judges in the heart's courtroom. Love in those stolen moments was a swift dance before the village could whisper. Listen softly as couples murmured under an oak's shade, and let me tell you, quietly, about an era when kissing required more courage than facing the plague. Imagine a moonless night in the 13th century Europe when stars twinkle over wheat fields and wind through dry stalks seems to hide a secret. At the village edge, behind the cowshed, two shadows stand close, hearts pounding, not just from love, but fear of discovery. A quick kiss, meant to be secret, is cut short by a neighbor's dog barking wildly, as if the whole village were alerted. Kissing? Ensure the gossiping neighbor's asleep, the dog's tired, and the priest isn't passing with cross in hand. Premarital sex, though common, was a dangerous game, where each step could lead to village stares, a fine, or worse, a lengthy sermon from the pulpit. In the medieval world, premarital love wasn't absolutely taboo, but it was watched as closely as a prized harvest. The village, with its huddled huts and invisible ears, was a natural spy network. The bread seller with keen eyes might spot a hurried handclasp at the market. A child darting through fields could glimpse a couple behind the cowshed and tell their mother. The priest, with quill and sin ledger, was the final judge, ready to ask blush-inducing questions in confession. A stolen kiss, if caught, could mean a fine, a goose or some turnips, or public shaming, like standing before the church in a dunce cap. But the commonest consequence was a rushed wedding, where the village chuckled and whispered they'd gone too far. Premarital sex was more common than thought, especially in small villages where young couples met by wells, at fairs, or in the flickering light of harvest nights. But commonality didn't mean freedom. The church, with strict doctrine, viewed sex outside marriage as sin, though they were often lenient if the couple wed afterward. In some regions, hand fasting, an informal betrothal, allowed couples to live as spouses before formal vows. In a simple rite, often under an old oak or by the village well, they clasped hands, swore oaths, and were engaged in the community's eyes. Hand fasting, with its flexibility, let couples test love, but it was a double-edged sword. If a child arrived before the wedding, the village whispered, and the priest might demand a quick marriage to right the wrong. A tale from a small village shows the stealth and stakes of premarital sex. A young couple, smitten after market glances, met behind the cowshed, thinking darkness and wind would hide them. They were careful, choosing moonless nights when the sharp-eared neighbor was asleep. But one night the neighbor's dog barked furiously, waking the house, and the girl's mother appeared with a stick, eyes blazing. The couple, blushing, was dragged to the village elder, and by morning the story was out. The priest, after a long sermon on sin, ordered a quick wedding with a small fine, a hen, and some turnips. The ceremony was awkwardly silent, but the village, though gossiping, came to drink ale, joking that love outran the dog's bark. That tale, retold by the well, became a humorous anecdote, but also a warning for other moonlit dreamers. Hand fasting, though common, didn't always save couples from consequences. In some regions, if a couple didn't wed later, or if the girl bore a child and the man left, her family faced shame. A girl caught loving before marriage might be called dishonored by the village, though the same gossipers had kissed behind cowsheds in youth. Men, though less pressured, weren't immune. A lad caught meeting a girl by the well might face her father, scythe in hand, to discuss marriage plans. The village, with ceaseless curiosity, turned every stolen moment into a tale, and those tales, like hearth smoke, spread through every corner. Yet this scrutiny couldn't fully quench love. Medieval couples, with a spy's finesse, found ways past it. They met behind cowsheds, by wells, or in wheat fields, using wind as an ally. They traded glances at markets, clasped hands in fair crowds, and sometimes dared kiss under stars. Risks be damned. Bolder couples used secret signals, 3 taps on a cowshed wall or a flower left by the well, to arrange trysts. Those moments, though risky, proved love, though watched, could bloom. They loved not for freedom, but because their hearts, like field stars, needed no village permit to shine. The irony of premarital sex lies in this. Though the church and village frowned, it happened, secretly, but often. Hand fasting offered an escape, but not all were lucky. A quick kiss, a stolen night, could lead to vows, fines, or just village laughter. Still, couples rushed fleetingly before the village knew. Those moments, though dangerous, are part of a silent history where people defied rules with daring and wit. And they loved quietly, like moonlight on fields, before the village could murmur. But not every kiss led to a rushed wedding. Harsher rules beyond village stairs loomed, rules about virginity, where a misplaced smile could fuel drama bigger than a fair. Close your eyes. Let the stars guide you to where whispers were judged and virginity became a legal contract bursting with drama. From stolen kisses under starlight, where medieval couples played spies to dodge village eyes, we step into a more theatrical stage, the bridal chamber, where flickering torches in the village awaited a small but mighty sign. In the 13th century, virginity wasn't just moral but a legal contract, especially for nobles, judged by bedsheets like history's first Yelp review. A bloodstain or its absence could spark lawsuits, shame, or annulment, while men, as usual, got a shrug. Women with anxious eyes and sly smiles sometimes used chicken blood to fool the village, but scrutiny from mothers-in-law to priests never relented. Listen softly as the village murmurs outside the bridal door, and let me tell you quietly about an era when virginity was pricier than gold, but drama endless as a fair. Imagine a wedding night in medieval Europe when torches from old oaks light a muddy path to the groom's house. The village gathers, not for feasting, but for an odd rite where bedsheets testify to honor. In a small room with rough curtains and a crackling hearth, the young bride lowers her head, heart racing, not just from love, but from the weight of invisible eyes outside. By morning, the mother-in-law, with a gaze keener than a dagger, will check the sheets for a bloodstain, proof of virginity. If found, the village sighs, raises mugs, and continues the feast. If missing, drama erupts, bigger than a market turnip feud. Bed sheets, it seems, were history's first public review, where a bride's honor was measured by a tiny red mark. Virginity in the Middle Ages wasn't personal. It was legal property, especially among nobles. A bride traded in marriage contracts for land, cattle, or alliances had to bring untarnished honor, part of the deal. Lacking virginity could wreck the contract, leading to lawsuits, annulment, or family disgrace. In stone castles where marriages were political chess, bed sheets were checked with a bookkeeper's care. A stain was a triumph, waved like a victory flag. A spotless sheet invited trials, with the groom's family accusing deceit, demanding dowry back, or annulling the union. Men, as usual, skated free. A groom with a past in brothels or fairs faced no sheet checks. This inequity, like hearth smoke, clung to the medieval world, but no one dared say it loud. The sheet-checking ritual, though commoner among nobles, appeared in villages where the community played audience. Mothers-in-law, aunts, and gossipy neighbors huddled outside, murmuring about the bride's honor like it was a harvest report. A bride with anxious eyes could feel the village's weight even in her private room. In one small village, a lawsuit flared over a spotless sheet. The groom's family, with harsh eyes, accused the bride of deceit, demanding annulment and their 3-cow dowry back. The bride's family, unyielding, offered proof, a sworn oath before the priest, and some cleverly prepared chicken blood. The case dragged a month, with villagers picking sides, whispering by wells and markets. Finally, the priest, weary of drama, brokered peace, and the couple lived on, though village eyes never forgot that sheet. The tale, retold over harvests, became a humorous anecdote, but also a reminder that virginity was a dramatic contract. Women, with their cunning, sometimes outsmarted the village. Chicken blood, or sometimes pigs, was carefully prepared, dripped on sheets before dawn, like a prop in an honor play. A bride, knowing the village waited outside, might slip a tiny vial from the kitchen, with a sly smile and twinkling eyes. Mothers, aunts, or midwives, wise in years, taught daughters to safeguard honor, not for deceit, but survival. A spotless sheet could ruin not just the bride, but her family, bringing shame, lost dowry, or village shunning. Chicken blood and its irony became a lifeline, a secret the village suspected but didn't dare voice. Women, though bearing heavier scrutiny, knew their sharpest weapon in this eyed world was wit. But not every bride needed chicken blood. In villages where marriages were practical deals, virginity was sometimes less rigid, if a wedding followed. A girl caught loving before vows faced gossip, but if married, drama often faded, like forged smoke in the wind. Nobles with complex marriage contracts were less forgiving. A noble bride, suspected of lost chastity, could drag her family into lengthy trials, with priests, lawyers, or even kings judging. Honor in castles was pricier than gold, and a white sheet could shatter alliances. Men, peasant or lord, rarely faced such scrutiny. A groom with a shrugging smile was forgiven all faults, as if honor was only women's burden. Virginity scrutiny didn't just come from family or village. The church, with strict doctrine, saw it as purity's emblem, extolled through St. Virgin tales. A bride, before her wedding, might hear her mother recount knights who died defending honor, a warning that God watched too. Priests, in confession, ask pointed questions about premarital acts, leaving blushing brides muttering lies. But the church, though mighty, couldn't check every sheet. Women, with wit and chicken blood, sometimes won this game, though village eyes never fully forgave. Virginity, with all its drama, is part of a silent history where women bore greater weight, but countered with daring and humor. Those bed sheets, checked under torchlight, testify to an inequitable world where a woman's worth was a tiny red mark. But women, as ever, endured more stares, from in-laws, neighbors, to God. They lived, loved, and sometimes laughed at these rules, knowing their hearts, like weeds, needed no stain to bloom. And they loved quietly, though the village murmured. But not all love unfolded under village eyes. Other tales, subtler, were coded in Latin verse and stolen glances, where hearts loved without sheets or contracts. Close your eyes. Let the torchlight guide you to where letters hid under pillows, and love became a poem no one dared read aloud. From drama-laden bed sheets, where virginity was a legal contract under village torches, we quietly step into a darker medieval corner, not sin's shadow, but of letters tucked under pillows and glances fiercer than hymns. In the 13th century, same-sex love existed, though coded in Latin poetry, whispered vows in monastery halls, or shy smiles between ladies in castles. The church, with its towering pulpit and sin ledgers, ever lurked, ready to frown at any heart daring to stray from norms. But hearts, as usual, needed no permit to stir, and love, though veiled, bloomed, silent as a candle in the night. Listen softly as a Latin letter unfolds in darkness, and let me tell you quietly about an era when same-sex love was a poem no one dared read aloud. Imagine a small medieval European monastery where dim candlelight flickers on cold stone walls and hymns echo through long corridors. In a cramped cell, a young monk bends over a wooden desk, quill gliding across parchment, crafting Latin verses thick with longing. These lines in the church's tongue speak not of God, but of another heart, a stolen glance shared during prayer. The letter, carefully folded and tucked under a pillow, is a dangerous secret, burning hotter than the candle beside. In the Middle Ages, same-sex love had no name as today, no flags or festivals, but it existed, veiled in poems, letters, and fleeting moments, like starlight slipping through a monastery shutter. The church, with its stern doctrine, branded same-sex love a sin, a deviation against God's will. From the pulpit, priests condemned unnatural acts, and in sin ledgers, tiny script detailed punishments, from penance to exile, or worse, the flame of the Inquisition. But reality, as ever, was messier than dogma. In the monastery shadows, in the castle's flickering glow, people loved, though forced to hide. Monks sworn to chastity sometimes penned Latin letters, using sacred language to code their heart's desire. Noblewomen, in silken gowns and discreet smiles, exchanged vows, glances, and sometimes an embroidered handkerchief, a silent signal of unspoken love. The church frowned, but hearts, like unquenched candles, needed no priest's permission to burn. Same-sex love, though veiled, left traces in medieval poetry. Troubadours, wandering minstrels singing of love in courts, sometimes composed ambiguous verses where the beloved's gender blurred. A poem sung under castle torchlight might praise a friend with golden hair and star-like eyes. But the court, with knowing smiles, sensed it wasn't for a lady. These lines, draped in florid language, let same-sex love slip past watchful eyes, like weeds through stone cracks. In monasteries, learned monks wrote Latin poems lauding sacred friendship, but their fervent metaphors, fire and light, betrayed a deeper tale. These verses, scribed on parchment, prove love, though forbidden, left its mark, quiet as a candle in the night. But such love wasn't always safe. In a small monastery, a tale tells of a young monk caught writing a letter to a fellow brother, its Latin lines alive with longing. The letter, carelessly found by another, reached the bishop, who frowned and spoke of purgatory. Yet the bishop, with discreet mercy, only demanded penance and silence. The letter burned in the hearth, but the story, whispered in monastery halls, became a minor legend, proof that even the stern church sometimes blinked at human hearts. Such mercy, though rare, was a faint glow in the Middle Ages darkness, where same-sex love lived in hiding. In castles, noblewomen found ways to love, coding their feelings. A lady in silk and gentle smiles might give her friend a small ring etched with delicate patterns, a silent vow. They met in gardens under ancient oaks, whispering tales no court dared fathom. These moments, though discreet, showed love, though banned, could bloom, like wildflowers in a castle's yard. But scrutiny never strayed far. A servant overhearing might murmur to the stewardess, and the tale, though not reaching priests, could ripple through court gossip like smoke from a forge. These women, with finesse, knew their love must dwell in shadows, but their eyes, like candles, never dimmed. Same-sex love in the Middle Ages, though hidden, wasn't always tragic. There were moments of joy, laughter, and poems sung in darkness. A monk penning a Latin letter might chuckle while tucking it under his pillow, knowing his friend would smile reading it. A lady offering a handkerchief might feel her heart race as her friend clasped her hand in the garden. These fleeting moments prove love, even in history's shadows, had power to defy doctrine, stares, and sin ledgers. They loved not for freedom, but because their hearts, like skybound stars, needed no village permit to shine. The irony of medieval same-sex love lies in this. Though the church forbade it, it endured, quiet but fierce. Latin poems, embroidered handkerchiefs, and stolen glances were codes, letting love survive a scrutinized world. These tales, whispered in monasteries, courts, and history, are part of the Middle Ages, where people faced rules with daring and wit. And they loved quietly, like a candle burning in darkness, before the village could judge. But not all love hid in shadows. Other moments, more dramatic, saw hearts shatter marriage contracts, with the village as audience to drama grander than fairs. Close your eyes, let the candlelight guide you to where forbidden kisses rang, and adultery became the village's spectacle. From Latin letters tucked under pillows, where medieval same-sex love burned in shadow, we quietly stepped to a stage more theatrical, where village eyes didn't just watch, but judged. In the 13th century, adultery wasn't merely a stolen kiss behind the stable. It was an explosion rupturing family contracts, shaking honor, and sparking drama bigger than a village fair. Women with anxious eyes and racing hearts faced harsh penalties, public shaming, exile, or worse, lifelong bitter stares. Men, as usual, escaped with a sheep as fine or a shrug, while cuckolded husbands could draw swords, turning the village into spectators of a blood and tears play. Adultery, it seems, was a game women always lost, but one the village never missed. Listen softly as church bells toll like justice, and let me tell you, quietly, about an era when drama was the village's spice. Imagine a misty evening in medieval Europe, when torchlight from stables glows on muddy paths and a horse's whinny seems to herald trouble. In a hidden corner, two shadows stand close, sharing a hasty kiss, believing it secret. But the church bell, tolling afar, seems to mark justice, and the neighbor lady, with ears keener than a hound's, saw it all from her window. By morning, the village gathers at the well, whispering of the new scandal, tastier than turnip soup. Adultery in the Middle Ages wasn't just two people's affair. It was a public trial, threatening family honor, marriage contracts, and even the cowshed. A misplaced kiss like forge smoke spread through the village, and drama like torchlight never faded. Medieval marriage was an economic contract sealed with land, cattle, or neighborly peace vows. Adultery thus didn't just break hearts, but violated property, honor, and social order. Women, as bearers of family honor, bore the heaviest consequences. A wife caught loving another might face public shaming, wearing a straw or cloth dunce cap, sometimes feathered for extra disgrace, paraded through the village amid children's giggles and bread sellers' bitter glares. In some regions, she was exiled or worse, returned to her family, stripped of dowry and honor. In courts, where marriages were political chess, a noblewoman's adultery could lead to imprisonment, annulment, or rarely a bloody end. Men, as ever, were spared. A husband caught sneaking with a wool seller might pay a sheep or some turnips as fine, with an apology before the priest. This inequity, like mud's stench on village paths, was part of the Middle Ages, but no one dared say it loud. Public punishments were adultery's dramatic hallmark. In a small village, a wife caught glancing at the blacksmith was made to wear a shameful cap, straw or cloth, sometimes feathered for mockery. She walked the village with children's laughter and bread sellers' harsh stares. The village peacekeeper, staff in hand, led the parade like hosting a fair. In some places, harsher penalties applied. She stood before the church, holding a half-burned candle as the priest sermonized on sin. These punishments, though severe, reminded the village that marriage contracts were sacred and adultery a crack unforgivable. But drama, like church bells, never stopped there. The village, with ceaseless curiosity, kept whispering, retelling the tale through harvests, a bitter anecdote. In courts, adultery was royal-level drama. A famed 14th century French court scandal involved a noblewoman suspected of loving a knight, not her husband. It began with a stolen glance in a banquet hall where candlelight and lyre music masked whispers. But a servant with sharp ears told the stewardess, and soon the court buzzed. The lady's husband, a powerful lord, drew his sword, demanding honor cleansed in blood. The affair dragged months with priests, lawyers, and the king intervening. The lady was confined to a tower, the knight exiled, and the court, though whispering, toasted with wine to gossip. That tale, chronicled, became a court legend, proving adultery in castles or huts was a drama explosion no village or kingdom could ignore. Cuckolded husbands had rights to defend honor. A peasant, finding his wife loved the blacksmith, could drag her to the elder, demanding fines or annulment. A lord with a sharp sword might challenge the rival, turning stables into arenas. These clashes, rarely bloody, were drama's heart, with the village watching like at a fair. But not all husbands fought. Some, with wry eyes, chose forgiveness or fainted to save marriage contracts and cowsheds. Women, though, were rarely fully forgiven. A wife, even for a misplaced glance, could carry bitter stares for life, like smoke on wool. Women, with their cunning, sometimes hid affairs. A kiss behind the stable might be cloaked as fetching firewood. A market glance could pass as asking wool prices. But the village with invisible ears rarely bought such lies. A wife suspected of straying might bow in confession, muttering penance, but the priest with quill noted every detail like a sin's accountant. These cover-ups, though clever, often fell to the village's curiosity, and drama like church bells rang on. Adultery, with all its theatrics, is part of a silent history where people defied rules with daring and madness. Stolen kisses, misplaced glances, and drawn swords prove love, though risky, found ways to bloom. But women, as ever, bore heavier costs, from dunce caps to village glares. They lived, loved, and sometimes laughed at the drama, knowing their hearts, like weeds, needed no priest's leave to grow. And drama, as ever, spiced the village, sweetening long days by wells and cowsheds. But not all love ended in public drama. Other tales, sturdier, saw hearts overcome not just stares, but plague, taxes, and forbidden calendars, blooming like grass between stones. Close your eyes. Let the church bells guide you to where true love began, not with drama, but quiet moments under moonlight. From adultery scandals shaking villages, where church bells tolled like justice and village eyes never forgave, we quietly step to a wheat field where silver moonlight paves the way for hearts daring to love. In the Middle Ages, love wasn't a tale of roses or candlelit vows. It was a silent triumph, overcoming the church's thick forbidden calendars, taxes crushing turnip sacks, and plague lurking in cold winds. Love bloomed through hurried market glances, letters tucked in hut walls, and moonlit elopements with the village as reluctant audience. Loving, then, was a victory over history, like grass sprouting between stones. Listen softly as words of love whisper in darkness, and let me tell you quietly about an era when hearts, though watched, found ways to shine. Imagine a moonless night in the 13th century Europe when stars twinkle over wheat fields and crickets hum as if guarding a secret. At the village edge, two shadows dash through dry stalks, hands clasped, hearts racing, not just from love, but fear of capture. They're a young couple, defying families, pushing other matches, determined to flee for each other. Her parents wanted her wed to a man with 5 cows. His urged a girl with a big plot. But love, like weeds, wouldn't bow to cattle and land contracts. They hid in a friend's hayloft, surviving anxious days just to hold hands under moonlight. Finally, after weeks of village gossip, their families relented, and the wedding, though simple, became a minor legend, proof that love, though forbidden, could outlast village stares. Medieval love was a risky dance, weaving through seemingly impossible barriers. The church, with its towering pulpit and blood-red calendar, turned love into a puzzle tougher than harvests. A couple, wanting to love without breaking holy days, might count fingers by hearthlight, only to find Tuesday forbidden too. Taxes, heavy with turnip sacks and the last goose, weighed on huts, making love wait past harvests or harsh winters. Plague, a ghostly threat, reminded that each kiss might be the last. But hearts, like unquenched stars, bloomed despite rules and perils. A market glance amid turnip stalls and hawkers' cries was worth more than bouquets. A secret letter scrawled on rough parchment, hidden in hut walls, burned hotter than hymns. Love in the Middle Ages was a quiet feat, like grass through cold stone. Troubadour love poetry, with lyre strums and florid words, testifies to love's endurance. Wandering minstrels, singing from courts to village markets, crafted verses of unattainable love. A poem sung under castle candles spoke of a distant beloved with moonlit hair and starry eyes. The court, with sly smiles, knew the beloved might not exist, but the poem's yearning lines were a heart's manifesto. In village markets, troubadours sang simpler tunes of a girl by the well or a lad behind the cowshed, and villagers, chuckling, nodded quietly, knowing love, though watched, lived in each verse. These poems, scribed on parchment or passed orally through generations, were faint lights in the Middle Ages' darkness, where hearts spoke though the village listened. But love wasn't just poetry or glances. Some couples dared all to elope, like grass splitting stone to grow. In a small village, a young pair fled, defying family and village. They met by the well, stealing glances between waterhalls and whispered vows under an ancient oak. When her family arranged another match, they fled, carrying a turnip sack and their only hen. They hid in the forest, enduring cold days just to be together. The village, with bitter eyes, buzzed over the scandal, but when the couple returned, hand in hand, families relented. Their wedding, without cattle or land, was a small victory, retold by the well with laughter and grudging admiration. That tale, like a troubadour's poem, proves love, though banned, could shatter stone to grow. Medieval love, though fraught, wasn't always drama. There were quiet moments, like couples holding hands by the hearth, forgetting winter's chill and village eyes. There were bold moments, like kisses behind cowsheds, despite barking dogs. There were timeless moments, like whispered vows under moonlight, knowing plague might strike any time. Love then was rebellion, a silent war on church, taxes, and history. They loved, not for freedom, but because their hearts, like skybound stars, needed no priest's leave to shine. The irony of medieval love lies in this. Though watched by the church, crushed by taxes, and threatened by plague, it bloomed, quiet but fierce. Market glances, letters in hut walls, and elopements were codes, letting love survive a ruled world. These tales, whispered by wells, in hut kitchens, and through troubadour verse, are part of history, where people faced barriers with daring and wit. Love, like weeds, grew through laws and plagues, and they loved quietly as history murmurs to us. But medieval love's tale doesn't end with moonlight or poetry. Other moments saw hearts conquer not just rules, but time, leaving lasting marks in history's silent pages. Close your eyes. Let the moonlight guide you to where those tales end, and love becomes an eternal song, echoing through history's wheat fields. From wheat fields where medieval love sprouted like weeds between stones, we close our moonlit journey where hearts dared to stir despite all. In the 13th century, love was a stealthy dance through thin hut walls, blood-red forbidden calendars, and mud and hearth smoke scents. It overcame the church's sin ledgers, taxes crushing turnip sacks, and plague lurking in cold winds. Through market glances, Latin poems under pillows, and elopements, love was a silent victory, like starlight piercing dark clouds. Brothels drama, bedsheet checks, or dunce caps couldn't stop hearts, like weeds growing through laws and perils. They loved quietly, despite village whispers, priests' frowns, or troubadour songs never sung loud. Love, it seems, was an eternal song, ringing through history, needing no one's leave to shine. Those moments, kisses behind stables, letters in hut walls, fairground glances, prove hearts needed no red sheets or cattle contracts to live. Though watched and weighed, love slipped through, like moonlight through roof gaps. Close your eyes. Let the river's rush lull you, and let history whisper quietly, as they loved. As sleep comes, bearing stars and weeds, you'll see medieval love, though in darkness, shining still, like a fire never quenched.